Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are today. My name is Peter LaMantia of Authentic Web. Today, I want to drill in on the external DNS zone mess that exists everywhere we look. The DNS underpins everything we do in digital. And with digital transformation moves to the cloud, it has become much more important as zone file complexity grows to support the business. We'll talk about the zone files, examples of exposure risk, why it matters, the importance of change management controls, and how to empower and make it easy for teams to get and keep control. Knowing we are all pressed for time, we'll go through this presentation in just under 20 minutes, and I hope you gain some insights to help your teams and organization mitigate these exposures. As an agenda, we'll start off with the mission. What the DNS zone mess is, or as a junk drawer of your infrastructure largely ungoverned. We'll share examples of dangling DNS or orphan DNS related to CNAMEs or subdomains, why it matters, and the potential impacts to brand trust and security risk. We'll share some real-world data from audits on where DNS hygiene issues are evident. And then we'll sum it up with 4 story points and then give you 2 guiding actions to ensure your brand trust is not compromised. Because let's face it, brand trust, or rather loss of trust in today's digital economy, is very damaging. Let's look at the DNS Hygiene Mission first. The objective here is to protect the business and keep your customers safe, and ensure that your trusted brand position is maintained and enhanced over time. And how to achieve that objective is by making it easy with tools to establish control, gain visibility, and where possible, automate provisioning and monitor for security exposures. The result then is to empower teams to get and keep control. And how these actions reduce risk and cost to the business to manage this area, even while the surface area complexity grows as increasingly we all move more to the cloud. Let's look at a new domain on day 1. It's registered and a few resource records are set up in the zone file. A start of authority record, a couple of A records for the Apex and WW, Amex for mail, perhaps a CNAME to validate a certificate, and if you have a good security policy, establishing SPF and DMARC to prevent the domain from being used in phishing exploits. But then, over time, the days, weeks, months, and years, it becomes messy. It gets very messy because it's largely ungoverned, and the life cycle of domain typically exceeds the turnover of key employees that manage this area. And in the end, what you're left with is a control gap disaster in the making. Here's an analogy I heard not long ago, that the external DNS is like the kitchen junk drawer. It starts off simple enough with good intention. We add a few records, it all looks tidy, nice and easy to reference, but then as time goes on, digital is active, and various personnel start entering zone records for new campaigns, programs, new services, validation records, test records, staging, in all manner. Typically, zones are added and only periodically removed. And at the end of the day, your zone file looks like this. And hidden in that junk drawer are records that are susceptible to compromise. And these are the records that bad actors target to compromise you, and you'll not know until the attack has already been perpetrated, or it can go on for long periods of time simply undetected. Let's now look at a dangling DNS issue. We have 2 services. We have our DNS services and we have our web service. So the web service group, they set up a web resource for a service or a campaign, and they give it a name, new.webservice.com. That web resource is then used in many ways, which may include an application, web or mobile, where the app may have a resource name new.webservice.com hard-coded in the application. Everything gets tested, you're ready to go, and at that point, Digital goes out and registers a name to promote the service. And they launch it. They establish a CNAME to hide the resource record, but it's now live. Hooray. It runs, everybody's happy, the service works great, it evolves over time, but eventually it runs out of its life cycle. Then at some point down the road, that resource is turned down. The resources are deleted and the business moves on. But the CNAME is still active. And this is what we call dangling DNS with nowhere to go. Then along comes the cyber attacker using tools to uncover dangling DNS in your zone. And eureka, they devise an attack plan, create their own web resource in some other cloud service, name it new.webservice.com, and bingo, they've just taken over the service at brandservice.com. Let's look at the same situation with a subdomain. The team sets up a service at a cloud provider with an IP resource destination and prepares to make it ready for the internet. When it's all ready, the public domain, service.brand.com, is set up and you're ready to go and it's live. Hooray. True to form, the service runs its life cycle until it's no longer needed and the resource is deleted. The IP is taken down, but the subdomain remains active. Again, a dangling DNS record. Along comes the attacker. And attackers have the ability to cycle through hundreds of thousands of IP addresses at a target web cloud service. Not as easy as a CNAME, but research has shown that they've been able to do this. When they get a hold of that IP, they're then able to take over your service.brand.com, and they now can compromise your customers, your partners, and your business. So what's all this mean? These real-world activities that are happening every day, all day, and you're likely being compromised now, but you just don't know it because you don't have control. Or they can be used as phishing destinations to steal credentials or personal identifiable information. And or. This could just be the first step to gather information, credentials to execute the second, third, or fourth step in their plan. It's not just me talking about this for my own purposes to selling control software. This is being supported by many organizations, including one phrase from Microsoft.com that I found on their website. Subdomain takeovers are a common high-severity threat for organizations that regularly create and delete many resource records. Think about that. You prioritize high incident probability with high severity outcomes. External DNS falls into that category. Every organization needs to establish process and systems or you're going to get burned. There's a great report done by IDC and Efficient IP that they prepared it just this year. Along all the examples in the frequency and the impacts to business are increasing as the surface area grows, and how the attacks are more diverse and how bad actors are exploiting the insecure DNS protocol that makes the internet operate, or the misconfigurations in your zones that allow them to conduct these exploits. As further evidence, I want to share some proofs that we have seen through real-world enterprise DNS audits. These were audits. This was the topic of another webinar we did in October, where we gave a full review and revealed the audit results. So you can go and have a look at that webinar. I pulled a few slides out of that webinar for here because it's relevant. So let's look at managed DNS. So what we did is we looked at 11 large organizations and we wanted to know how many managed DNS services they have live today. And I was astounded to find that in many cases it's dozens. These are untended DNS services. It's impossible for teams to ensure control over all of them. Zones can be changed without authorization or knowledge, and the severity of risk is significant without any change controls possible across all these different services. So the best practice here is to consolidate DNS services and implement change controls. Then we looked at the IPs that are live. So these are live IPs only represented at the apex of the domain. So below the surface in the full zone, you can expect this to be many times greater. So what's going on here? Many of these IPs are likely untended or forgotten or representative of dangling DNS risk. Hackers take control of the IPs and the CNAMEs. So the risk here again can be moderate to severe depending on what's set up at these IPs and whether or not they've been mitigated. So here we need to gain IP visibility on external DNS, establish chain controls over these zone edits. Lastly, we looked at the resolution evidence. So when we look at resolution, what we see is a high percentage of non-responsive domains that indicates poor DNS hygiene. Now, granted, additional analysis is required to really understand, optimize the digital footprint, and understand the security exposures. But again, this is just at the apex level, so you expect that this is much greater below the surface. And poor DNS hygiene creates these security holes, as we've shown. And poor DNS hygiene impacts digital performance. And where there are no SOA records, they're at risk of hijacking. So I rate these risks from either low to severe, depending on what they are. Each needs to be inspected and understood and mitigated. So the best practice here, you've got to make it easy for teams to manage it. Give them tools around visibility. Give them workflow. Implement improved zone search function or DNS security monitoring, and ensure that every single record is covered with every single domain is covered with the start of authority record. Enterprise DNS Audits is a summary. What it does, it reveals to us that there are big gaps in DNS hygiene, security, and compliance controls. Remember, we only looked at this as the apex, so this is the tip of the iceberg on really what's going on in the DNS zone. And the research we see shows that there's an increasing frequency and larger business impacts. And those impacts can be substantial. Customer distrust or churn, regulatory issues, P&L or brand damage, the cost to be reactive to fix and address security incidents, and career damage. If this is an area that's under your purview, you need to get this under control. So why it persists? Because it's hard. There's a lack of tools, and businesses operate in silos, which makes uniform governance difficult. There's a lack of ownership. In some cases, expertise is lacking, certainly over time. C-level doesn't understand it. There's some complacency. It's really unseen. And a lot of people just see it and understand that it's messy, and they don't want to open it up. And they have a lack of control systems. They just don't have a handle on it. So these 4 points, I think, will really tell the story fairly well. So the first point is that DNS and domains are extremely vulnerable to compromise. We see it all the time. It's in the news. I'm sure you've read it yourself. And the reason is there are a lot of external threats. So whether it's social engineering, compromises, DDoS, credential theft, man in the middle, different types of hijacks or phishing. All of these threats are out there all day long, every day, imposing a problem. And it persists because it's really hard for IT teams to get and keep control. And the reason for that is that because of what we do ourselves internally, a lot of manual process, which creates errors and omissions, inconsistency of expertise over time, silos, collaboration, lack of change management controls. So if we think about the causes, we got to think about what can we do about that. And that's where we talk about DNS control systems. So number 3 is about establishing digital control systems and putting in place DNS security policies. And a control system means you bring everything together into one easy to use system that teams can execute and manage the digital footprint efficiently on the DNS. That gives you then control, visibility, and automation. And not only do you improve security, but like all software, you're able to reduce the total cost of ownership over time. So since the founding in the early days of the internet, the cost of managing domains and DNS has just continued to grow. And it will continue to do that over time unless systems are put into place to be able to manage this area. So with automation software, you can actually reduce the total cost of ownership while at the same time improving your security and compliance posture. I'm going to leave you with two things to do. The first thing you really must do is to get and keep your DNS hygiene under control. Critical. How you do it, that's up to you. But it won't work unless you make it easy for teams. So putting in place some sorts of systems for control, visibility, and automation. And by taking these steps, you'll help ensure that your company and customer risk is mitigated so that you can maintain a trusted brand on the internet. I want to thank you for your time. I do hope this review was helpful to help you think about this problem and the information that you can take and share with your peers and leaders to help address this growing threat that has really been left unaddressed for many years. If you have any questions, would like to learn more, or even see a demonstration of what an external DNS control system looks like, do reach out. We've really re-engineered the entire process to make it easy and powerful. Have yourself a great day. Best of luck in your mission to get and keep control of your DNS zone hygiene. Thank you very much.